So what I'm going to do is kind of lead you through a little bit of a story and kind of show you my synthesis of this stuff. I actually just read Joe's book last month. I started, I think, on the 1st and finished about 4 days ago. I want to give a call out to a guy in the audience who was really my introduction. Patrick Morris really helped me understand this stuff. And so I want to say thank you for that. So I want to show you a little bit about my traditional grading methods in college algebra. I've taught 23 sections of college algebra starting in winter 2014 all the way through last winter 2020. In my standard class, I used weighted inner product. You can see on the left-hand side, these were my grade weights, and the right-hand side was the kind of the way that I would grade. And when I was calculating final grades, I had 165 different data points, so my spreadsheets were always kind of painful. And with that, I ended up serving 614 students over 4 years, and these were kind of the pass rates using traditional grading. So I had 61.9% passing and 38.1% not passing. And I was always drained at the end of the quarter. The amount of work that it took to collect data on 165 data points and then calculate final grades was exhausting. And eventually I got to a place where I started to ask myself, what would I say about an engineer who designs a car that kills 38.1% of its users and then says that the reason the user died is because they need to learn to drive more rigorously? Because that was really the excuse that I would hear a lot from, I grew up in the UCs in terms of my own education. And I remember when I was a grad student and grading, I got, in the back office, I got a printed schedule of all of the grade distributions. And then the statement was, we need your grades to look like that because that's rigorous teaching. And eventually, after having gone through like 4 years of this, I got to a place where I was like, I need a better way. And I forget which conversation with Patrick really drove home that my intention really doesn't matter that much. It's really the outcomes of my work. And the moment that thought really set in, I started thinking deeply about focusing on safety features and design principles to change the way that I graded in my math classes. And so what happened over a synthesis of 2 years was I deleted, I went from 165 data points to 7 data points. The 7 data points were quizzes and exams. So I had 5 quizzes and 2 exams. The quizzes were led from one to the next, and then the exams as well. So I think in Joe's book, he calls this double dipping. And he mentioned it in his presentation earlier, the idea that when you write assessments, you can write them so that you test old material while you're assessing new material. And I actually had designed those before reading his book, but I love the language that he had in there because it captured that exact idea. So then the question was, well, how do I actually grade the work? And this is kind of a standards-based model. I always like to joke that I'm taking the needle out of my arm. The needle is called points and my arms is called student learning. So I'm very slowly kicking that habit. I finally this quarter started for the first time to just delete points completely from my grade book. But that's like a 25-year process for me because I've been on that drug for a long time. And so I did continue to use points, but I referenced points to outcomes. So 90% and above was an A and it exceeded outcomes. 80% to 90% was a B, and met outcomes. 70% to 80% was a C, and then the below 70% I like to say Y, and that comes from Patrick actually, not yet. So the idea is that a student is always on their way to passing, and if they haven't met it on the day that they take an assessment, well then we just haven't met it yet. At the end of the day, there's actually no formulas. I base my final grade on my own judgments of the students' capacity and academic achievement. And then there's kind of some details here. I don't lecture anymore. I've actually spent the last 8 years of my life completely flipping my classroom. 100% of my content is online for free. I have a YouTube channel as well as my own website. I do not use Canvas to host this. One of the things that drives me nuts about Canvas is that it has open days and closed days, and that doesn't actually help students with financial aid. So if you ever had somebody that was waiting for their financial aid check, and they're not fully added the course, they can't get into the Canvas shell, and then they're like 2 weeks behind because they didn't get their check. And also if a student like has an incomplete and then you need to get them back into the Canvas shell, I just circumvent that problem completely by hosting all of my stuff on a public website for free, and it is going to be available for the rest of the time that I'm alive. I'm hoping I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old sleeping right on the other side of that wall. And I always joke with my wife that I'm going to see if I can convince one of them to host my website after I'm dead and gone. We'll see if that works. So anyways, the reason I say all that is that I don't lecture in class. So I've completely flipped my classroom. 100% of in-class time is active learning. That means that students really have a chance to engage with materials while we're working together. And then there's 7 quizzes and 11 weeks, or 7 assessments in 11 weeks. So I actually schedule the assessments throughout the quarter, and then I have specific retake days. So normally I have classes that meet 2 days a week, one on Monday, one on Wednesday, let's say. So I'll say that Wednesdays is test days. I'll have a calendar just like Ryan suggested where I kind of propose what pace they should go at. But the funny thing is that it's all self-paced for students. They get to choose when they go. And if I notice a student is falling behind, so I usually like to give my first assessment on Wednesday of week 2 so that they have that before census date. And then I'll grade it over the weekend. I'll get it back to them on Monday. And if I notice that, and then I'll have my second assessment on Wednesday of week 3. And if at that point I have 2 data points that are really, really good. And if I notice a student's falling behind, I'll kind of go contact that student and check in with them. And so from that standpoint, all of the quizzes are done individually. Each exam and quiz is scored based on that student's performance. And then I literally ask for every problem on the test, like, does the student demonstrate mastery of the standard? The really fun thing is that students can take a test as many times they need. Normally, if they've taken it a second time and they're not up to standards, like they're not a C level, that's on me. I have a whole retake process. So I have a 6-step 8-page instruction sheet on how to do retakes. I have a 4-page analysis of types of mistakes. Some people collect stamps, some people collect Jordan shoes. I collect math mistakes on exams. So I have this whole diagram, this whole like analysis that helps students analyze their mistakes, identify what they did wrong, come up with ideas on how to improve it. And then I actually individually, if a student hasn't told me when they're going to do their retake, I will reach out to that student and I'll help them plan their retake process. Yes, all of this is on my blog, so I can show that in just a bit. In fact, what's nice about this is we can actually just do this. I did this for this talk, actually. I wasn't planning on having to write this much during finals week, so I've missed some sleep on that, but to be honest with you, this is very important in my heart. So the blog post that I sent you was the most recent one that I did, and then if you look, what I do at the beginning of this thing is I just kind of give some background information, and at the bottom of this blog post I actually share with you the presentation slides as well as my FAQs. Thank you, Summer and Myra, for really like pushing me to think deeply. The two of you are just amazing. I also talk a little bit about where this consciousness came from, and then particular policies I use in my classes. So that's all on the blog post, and I'll make sure that Myra and Summer have that to put on the CAP website. I did kind of want to show a little bit. One thing that's kind of interesting about this whole process is that students are, let's say this, the assessment is not summative until a student has a C level and they've decided that they're happy. So another way to say that is all of my assessments are formative. Formative means used to guide learning, and summative means used to assign a grade. So what's funny about this is on the first attempt, I go home, I grade it, I give it back to them, and then they decide, basically when they get it back, they decide, am I happy with it? If it's below a 70%, they have to do corrections, and I don't force that onto them. I actually just sit down with them and talk to them, like, what's going on for you? Where you're at? How can we help you? And in those little dialogues, I can uncover some of the things they're struggling with and kind of help them through that. So it's not uncommon during those dialogues to get them integrated with an academic counselor, to take them over to the DRC, to create a checklist of things to help them get back on track. Like, those dialogues are really authentic dialogues about their learning needs at that moment. And Then we make a to-do list, we follow up with each other, and then they'll take a retake eventually after they finish their corrections. And what's kind of interesting about this is that the corrections process is quite interesting. This is an example of a student who's they're taking a intermediate algebra exam on rational equations. So I have students need to be able to simplify rational expressions involving multiplication and division. This division actually includes a multiplication because you got to take the reciprocal. There's a whole thing on factoring here. Then this one is the addition and subtraction with different denominators plus difference of squares. And 80% means that they are meeting the assessment criteria, the standard, but they haven't mastered it fully because they're making some silly mistakes, which is fine. So I just identify where the mistakes are and I say careful. Over here, the same thing. This one he was really struggling with. He got the right idea, but just applied it in the wrong way. So I was like, hey, go back and look at this. This one I could have pushed him a little bit harder, but he definitely understood the idea that he was trying to go. And then once he got his graded work back, what he did is he filled out at this point in the quarter, this is like week 8. So he fills out my assessment review, does a self-assessment, then he does solutions, and for every problem he misses, he writes some mistakes, identifies what he does wrong, and then he does a review. And then I think this guy actually redid this quiz and got a 20 out of 20, a different version. So when you see version J, I try to have versions A through J ready for the quarter with full solutions, and I do most of that work over the summer, which is exhausting. Yeah, so I guess I'll stop in one second. I kind of want to show what this has meant in my own classes. And so I think I can actually go right to the, basically, that's the blue is the grade distribution in traditional grading, and the orange is the grade distribution in my version of equitable grading, and the same thing is here. 90.6% of my students have passed in the last 2 years. That's out of 160 students. I actually know the names of everybody that didn't pass, and I know their circumstances, and I have some lessons that I took away from that. The last thing that I'll say is that I suck today as an instructor. I always say I suck today, but a little less than yesterday. I'm constantly looking to improve my systems, and I can tell you that I'm actually going to steal a lot of ideas from Joe Feldman and from Ryan, our co-presenter. I cannot recommend Joe's book highly enough. I'm going to read it again over the summer, and Ryan, for sure, I'm going to be having students tell me what grade they think they deserve. I love it.